Okay, differential rebuilds this time then. These are for the Series 2 Land Rover. I'm doing this prior to the V8 conversion and figured actually it'd be quite a good thing to video and show the before and after, because it's not only a diff rebuild but a ratio change as well. So currently the Series 2 is fitted with a 4.7 to 1 ratio differential, which they all had from factory, and these are later Land Rover diffs, which are 3.54 ratio. Now I've already rebuilt this differential here, been through new bearings throughout, thoroughly stripped and cleaned absolutely everything. Found a little bit of wear on the little diff shaft here, so that's been replaced. The gears themselves were okay, they cleaned up well. Pinion preload's been set, backlash has been set. Really happy with how it's all turned out. We've got a really good footprint mesh pattern between the pinion and ring gear. As you can see, this one's in the as bought state. This one I'm now going to go through and hopefully time lapse the cleaning and all the work I do on it. This should theoretically give me a 700 RPM drop, so the theoretical kind of road speed, if we sit at the same road speed, say 50 miles an hour, the engine will be doing 700 RPM less with this differential swap from 4.7 to a 3.54 gear change. So I'm going to do a before and after economy test. So before actually fitting these, I'll go out in the series, that'll be part of this video, and we'll do our before MPG test and then fit these and do our post test. I'm expecting the fuel economy to potentially drop with these taller gears, because the engine's actually going to be under more load to get it up and going, and the roads around here I'm not going to be sat at the optimum cruise speed of 55 mile an hour for long enough for the gear ratio swap to actually make any difference. However, with the V8, when that's fitted, I believe that we'll then have enough torque that the gear swap will make a big difference then in fuel efficiency. So yeah, that's the plan. Let's get this diff stripped down and see how bad it is. Okay, time to get the bearings off the diff centre and the outer races out of the diff casing. It's not the ideal bearing puller, but I believe it will do the job, certainly done the last one, so here we go. Okay, so I don't have sort of internal legs that are going to fit in the bearing, so I'm going to give it a go just with a couple of long bolts and hook the heads underneath and keep my fingers crossed. Okay, well, it's worked. So all I did different on the floor was had my feet on the diff just so I could Stop it trying to rotate. There we are. One outer race. It's twisted, so it's now going to be more difficult. There we go. Obviously I've got brand new bearings throughout, but it's always nice to be able to pull them out in one piece, but they could be used again. Okay, so I'm on the ground to remove the inner outer race of the pinion. So I've actually got the inner section of the bearing hair of another one I've taken out previously and chopped it in half, and this will now slot in and then sit in the outer race this way up, meaning I can hit this and not hit the outer race, or more importantly the shim that's behind there. So although I've got new shims, so I can set the pinion height when I rebuild it, it's always nice to have the original shim to play with as well. A long old Rover V8 rocker shaft. Oh, that's loads better. And there we have it. One race and one shim. And the shim has 0 damage on it, because essentially I've been inside it. Okay, so that's the differential all taken to bits, checked over. I did have to cheat on pulling the bearings off of here. The puller I've got, it wasn't quite strong enough, it bent up, or started to bend up, so I stopped that. So I did use the grinder just to grind the bearing down slightly until it was thin enough where I could just chisel it and crack the bearing and then obviously take it off. So there was no damage done to the shaft, and I think that's how I did this one. There's been a bit of time between stripping this and actually now recording this bit. Life's been busy over Christmas and New Year. It's now January 23, so I'm now going to go through and clean all these bits. They're horrible and dirty and grubby. That then means I can give them a proper inspection and then reassemble with the new bearings. So all I use for cleaning is brake clutch cleaner in a tub, some phosphoric acid in another tub, just to get rust off things and that, and then everything gets a sort of dunk in WD-40 or penetrating oil bath, just so it's all sort of lubed up and doesn't go rusty again in my shed before I then reassemble. So I'm not going to record the whole process of cleaning because obviously it's incredibly tedious and boring, but I'll do a couple of shots of that and then get on to assembly. Okay, that's all the bits cleaned up. Bits like this have got a little bit of surface rust on them. I don't know if that camera's picking that up really, but this has obviously got a lot more surface rust on. I don't know if the acid will take all this off, but you know, this I can hit with a wire wheel. Things like that I could wire wheel them, but just give it a dip in the acid and that will take off the majority of that surface rust that isn't really going to be an issue, but it's nice to get rid of it. Yeah, really pleased with how it all came out, all nice and clean. Got the new Timken bearings, Cortico seal, new shims for setting the preload and the pinion heights. I will install this first with the old shims, which are obviously saved. Just see where we are. It ought to be very similar, if not the same. I did retain And how I set the first pinion height on the other diff was I ground down the OD of the main bearing race, just so it slid in and out of the housing, so that I'm not bashing out, or because I don't have a press at the moment, every time I want to try a new shim in behind it. So I'm going to try and video as much of the process of assembly of this diff as possible. This is not an instructional video at all, it's just showing you me assembling the diff. I may go over torque settings, I may not, it depends whether I remember, if I remember at the time. But yeah, that's everything cleaned up, ready for assembly. Okay then, let's get into this assembly. So before putting the ring gear on the diff housing here, need to actually install differential in the centre, because the little shaft here won't actually slide through once the gear set's in place. Got some gear oil just to lubricate everything as it goes together. So just put a bit of that on everything, and I'll pop this together in super fast internet speed. So that's the actual differential unit there assembled. Now we can have I got this wrong? No, there we go. So now that's on, you can get that bolted down. I'm assembling this first without Loctite because I've got to set it up and check the runout. So it'll all be torqued up, fitted in the housing, and then put the DTI gauge on the back, and that's where I'll pick you guys back up again. Okay, so got the new Timken bearings. Get these opened up. So the inner race will be pressed onto the diff housing, the outer race will sit in here with the cup that will adjust the preload on there. So the next job really is to press these onto the diff housing or casing. On there. Now I don't have a press, so I'm doing it the way I've done it lots of times before, which is using an old race, something along these lines, although this is the wrong one, but an old one of these, and we'll just persuade it on. This workbench isn't the most sturdy workbench, so I will be doing it on the floor on a piece of wood. Obviously on both sides. Okay, that's them pressed on there. So once this one was done, as I say, just use an old inner race, piece of wood across there, tapped it down, hardly need any force at all, just a standard sized claw hammer, no lump hammers involved. Pressed nice and home. Then found a socket that would just fit in there, because when reversing it onto the other side, you don't really want to be sitting on there and tapping it, or even in a press you wouldn't want to sit on the face. So just putting a socket in there, so we're sat on there, not on the carriage. So that's those in position. Now we can sit this in here. And place the caps on as well. Got a bit tall for the camera now. Now I did dot punch these, so We've got 2 dots on here, which is this one this side, and 1 dot on here, which is this one this side. Right, so I'll get these caps torqued down. These bolts are now tightened up to 85 Newton meters. The caps get done to 90 Newton meters on this diff. Not all the diffs are the same, but I'll get those torqued down, nip up the preload, and then get the DTI gauge on here to check for runout. Okay, so I've got the ring gear set up on the diff unit in the housing, and got the magnetic base set up with the DTI gauge on, and the tolerance on this is 0.1 millimeters. I don't know if you can see this from the glare, if I can get it to focus as well, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so we're zeroed here, and this increment here is 0.1 of a millimeter. Each increment is 0.01. The runout we have is 0.05 millimeters, so I'm going to call that a win. So what I can do now is disassemble this, and these bolts can then be Loctited and torqued back up to the 85 Newton meters, and then I can start looking at the pinion height in here. Right, time to set the pinion height, or rather check it. I've got the original shim that came out of this diff. I'll slide that in there. This is an old outer race, which I've very crudely ground down the OD, just until it slides in here freely. It slides to be nice and square, ready to go in. So that's good. Brand new bearing on the pinion shaft. For a straight edge, I'm using the old intermediate shaft out of the Series 2 transfer box. There's a little bit of wear in it. Obviously this section I'm not going to use. I'm going to use that facing up. I'm level across here. I'm going to be resting on here, measuring here, and there's a slight section of wear there where the bearings were running on it, but again I'm going to rest here, so that won't have an effect for me. For gauge block, which I don't have, I'm going to use this shank of a bolt which I've cut down to size. It's around 39.42 millimeters long. The pinion height here should be 39.50. So I'm going to use feeler gauges in there. So we'll set that. And then I've got 0.06 millimeter feeler gauge here, 2.5 thou. And if I try and keep everything in place, you should just get a little friction on there, which I do. Obviously this isn't clamped down at the moment, but that's, you know, enough for me to say, okay, well, I'll reuse that original shim. We'll set the preload on the pinion and then assemble it and blue the gears up, check the mesh pattern, and then go from there. I'll keep using that ground down OD outer race until I'm happy that the mesh is right, and then I'll press in the new race and then double check the mesh pattern again. Right, so I've just torqued everything up here, set the backlash. I've also blued up the gears so I can check the mesh. I have reduced the shim size to increase the preload on these pinion bearings. I went with the original shims that were in here, and it just felt a little loose. It should be like a 3 Newton meter preload when you spin it or something, but I don't have the ability to measure that, so I'm going by feel, which is what I've always done on these diffs. I reduced the shim thickness by 2 thou, and that just gave me that bit of friction I was looking for when the pinion was in there, just, you know, with no load on it on the ring gear, without the ring gear in there. So that's set. I'm happy with that. Backlash, the tolerance on this is 0.1 to 0.17 millimeters. I've got my head torch on here for a bit of light, but we've got 0.12 millimeters there, so that's in spec and nice. And with the blue, the gears are meshing nicely in the center across the whole tooth. So again, I'm happy with that. I'm not going to play around with adjusting the shim behind the main race in there to adjust the pinion insertion or pinion height in relation to the ring gear. So happy with that. Now is strip it down, put the final race in there, torque it all back up again, double check the backlash and the mesh, and then insert the seal in here, Loctite everything down on the caps. So I'll see you when that's done. There we go then, that's the two diffs rebuilt, ready for the Series 2 Land Rover. Now I'm going to end this video here, it's probably already run on far too long. The next video on this project will be an MPG test on the 2.25 Series 2 Land Rover, then installing these two differentials, so changing from 4.7 to 1 ratio, going to these which are 3.54 to 1 ratios, and then doing another MPG test with the 2.25 petrol still in there. And then later on this year, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll put the 3.5 litre engine in there, the V8, and hopefully this will then give the gearing I want, so I can cruise at more comfortable speeds of lower engine RPM. And obviously the bigger engine will give me the pulling power to comfortably move away in first gear with these gears in, because apparently sometimes with these gears in, the 2.25 engine is a little bit underpowered to pull first gear, maybe on hill starts and things like that. But the proof will be in the pudding when we actually fit them and test them. Now I say later in the year because A, I've got to build the V8 engine first, which obviously I'll be doing a video on, and secondly because my mate has contacted me just while I was rebuilding a second diff and has said, hey Ian, my Land Rover's manual, kind of really want to put an auto box in it, can you help out a bit? So behind me now is a ZF HP22 4-speed auto box, which I'll now start stripping down and inspecting, getting a rebuild kit in for. So I may or may not video that. I'll definitely do some photos and stick them on Instagram, so I'll put a link in the comments section or in the description section of this video to that. And if I do video it, or any of it, obviously that will go up on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and yeah, subscribe if you like what you're seeing, hit the like button, and all that good stuff.